Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a really critical moment, seems like, in global diplomacy and military strategy.
Absolutely. There are several recent developments that, when you put them together, paint a very complex picture.
Right. We're going to try and connect some dots today, looking at this idea of an air truce in Ukraine, what's happening with U.S. President Trump's economic pressures, and a pretty major shift from Russia on missile deployment.
Exactly. It feels like everything's interconnected. Diplomatic moves, economic threats, military posturing, it's all happening at once. We'll focus on the recent actions, the statements from the key players involved.
Okay, let's start with Ukraine and this potential air truce. What exactly is being discussed?
Well, the Kremlin is reportedly considering offering Ukraine a, let's say, limited aerial ceasefire.
Limited how?
Specifically stopping drone and missile strikes. So not a full halt to fighting on the ground, it seems. Just focused on stopping the air attacks. And importantly, it sounds like this offer would depend on Kyiv also agreeing to hold fire from the air.
Okay. And this comes just as U.S. President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is heading to Russia.
That's right. Scheduled for August 6th or 7th, Russian President Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, he's highlighted how important these meetings are.
Especially for direct talks between Moscow and Kyiv.
Precisely. And there's even talk, a possibility, that Witkoff might actually meet with Russian President Putin himself during the visit.
Which is interesting given the timing. U.S. President Trump set that deadline, didn't he? The ultimatum for an end to the conflict.
He did. And it expires this week, August 8th.
And the stick is?
If no truce by then, the U.S. will impose new sanctions on Russia, potentially very heavy ones, maybe secondary tariffs around 100% on Moscow and its trading partners.
Wow, secondary tariffs. So that hits countries trading with Russia, too.
That's the idea. It really broadens the economic impact.
How are the leaders themselves positioning on this, Russian President Putin?
He's consistently stated Russia wants a peaceful resolution, supports stopping hostilities, but emphasizes needing the most effective path to peace. It's a bit vague, perhaps.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky?
He's holding firm on wanting an immediate, complete, and unconditional ceasefire. No ambiguity there.
We know there have been talks before, right, in Istanbul?
Yes. After a 3-year break, they had 3 rounds back in May, June, and July.
What came out of those?
Well, the last meeting, about 6 weeks ago, focused on settlement memorandums. The head of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Medinsky, mentioned Russia proposed short ceasefires.
How short?
Like 24 to 48 hours, just along the line of contact. The stated purpose was retrieving wounded and fallen soldiers.
And Kyiv's response or counterproposal?
They've suggested a high-level meeting, Ukrainian President Zelensky, Russian President Putin, but also involving U.S. President Trump and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
All together?
That was the proposal, aiming for before the end of August.
Okay, so diplomatic channels are active, but under this looming deadline. Let's shift to the economic pressure you mentioned, sanctions and tariffs.
Right. U.S. President Trump's administration is looking at hitting Russia's shadow fleet next.
The shadow fleet. These are the tankers used to get around oil sanctions.
Exactly. That hidden network. And the thinking seems to be, if Russian President Putin doesn't agree to a ceasefire by August 8th, these sanctions kick in.
Is that seen as a major blow?
Some are calling it an easy first step, perhaps implying more could follow. We should remember the previous administration already sanctioned over 200 such tankers.
Ah, okay.
U.S. President Trump had apparently held back on more restrictions, hoping for a peaceful settlement first.
So a lot could depend on what Witkoff brings back from Moscow.
It seems that way. There's a feeling U.S. President Trump would be, well, quite upset if his envoy returns empty-handed.
This isn't just the U.S., though. The EU has been active, too.
Yes, just in July, the EU brought in its 18th sanctions package. That targeted another 105 tankers.
Bringing the total?
Over 400. 415, I believe. And they also lowered the price cap on Russian oil, down from $60 to about $47.06 per barrel.
U.S. President Trump also linked oil prices directly to the conflict, didn't he?
He did. Stated that a $10 drop in global oil prices could basically force Russia to stop military actions. He suggested Russia's economy is already struggling quite a bit.
And it's not just Russia directly feeling the heat. What's this about India?
Well, reports suggest U.S. President Trump intends to raise tariffs significantly on India, possibly within the next day or so.
Why India?
because of their purchases of Russian oil. He'd mentioned a 25% tariff before and a sort of penalty for buying Russian oil and military gear. The argument is that India is helping finance the conflict.
How has India responded?
Their Ministry of Foreign Affairs call the U.S. criticism unjustified and unfair. They say they'll protect their national interests, and they needed Russian oil after their usual suppliers diverted to Europe, something the U.S. apparently encouraged earlier for market stability.
A complex picture indeed. And the EU isn't immune from tariff threats either.
No. U.S. President Trump has also threatened 35% tariffs on the EU if they don't meet certain investment commitments to the U.S. economy.
Commitments like?
We're talking $600 billion in investments over 3 years, $750 billion in energy purchases, and crucially, abandoning Russian fuel sources.
Big numbers. How does Russia view all these sanctions and threats?
They maintain the sanctions are illegal. The Kremlin's official line is that Moscow won't be dictated to with ultimatum language.
And Russian President Putin has mentioned sanctions and peace conditions before.
Yes, he's previously listed lifting sanctions as one of the conditions for reaching a peaceful resolution.
Okay, so we have diplomacy under pressure, economic screws tightening, and now a major military policy shift from Russia. Tell us about that.
This is significant. On August 4th, Russia withdrew from its self-imposed unilateral moratorium on deploying intermediate-range and shorter-range missiles.
A moratorium they declared back in 2019.
That's the one. Dmitry Peskov clarified on August 5th that Russia basically feels it's no longer bound by any restrictions here and can take necessary steps.
Why did they have the moratorium in the first place?
It came after the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The INF Treaty fell apart.
The INF Treaty. Reagan and Gorbachev, 1987.
Right. That treaty banned ground-launched missiles with ranges between 500 and 500 kilometers. Didn't cover air or sea-launched ones.
And it collapsed because?
The U.S. accused Russia of violating it with a specific missile, the 9M729, back in 2014. U.S. President Trump announced the U.S. withdrawal in 2018. It became effective in February 2019. Russia followed suit, and the treaty was officially dead by August 2019.
So after the treaty died, Russia put this voluntary pause on deployment.
Yes, and Russian President Putin actually proposed similar restrictions to the U.S. and NATO. But NATO rejected it.
Why?
They said it ignored the reality that Russia had already deployed that 9M729 missile, which NATO viewed as a violation anyway.
Even so, Russia maintained the moratorium for a while.
They did. In October 2020, Russian President Putin reaffirmed it, though he called the U.S. exit from INF a serious mistake, increasing arms race risks.
But he added a condition, didn't he?
Yes, that Russia would stick to the moratorium only as long as American-made missile armaments of similar classes do not appear in the respective regions. He also kept calling for NATO to declare a matching moratorium.
Did Russia offer any way to verify compliance?
They did. Proposed mutual verification measures, things like inspections of those Aegis ashore sites in Europe with the Mk-41 launchers,
Right.
and reciprocal inspections of the 9M729 missiles in Kaliningrad. Russia maintained the 9M729 complied with the old treaty anyway, but said they wouldn't deploy it in European Russia if NATO held off deploying similar weapons in Europe. Same offer for the Asia-Pacific.
But now they've withdrawn the moratorium. Why now?
The Russian Foreign Ministry stated on August 4th that their initiatives just did not meet reciprocity. They argue the U.S. and its allies haven't just planned to deploy these types of missiles, but have actually made significant progress.
Progress how? What specifically are they pointing to?
Several things. They say the U.S. is developing and testing various INF-range missiles, some already in production, that the Pentagon is setting up special units and infrastructure abroad for potential deployment, and that the U.S. is increasingly moving these kinds of systems into exercises with allies outside the U.S.
Are there concrete examples?
Yes. They cited, for instance, exercises in 2023 on Bornholm Island, Denmark, where the U.S. used Mk-70 launchers. That's a land version of the Mk-41, which can launch INF-range missiles.
Okay.
Then in 2024, the U.S. sent its Typhoon missile complexes, also with Mk-41 launchers, to the Philippines.
And more recently?
Exercises in Australia, July 2025. They deployed a similar complex there, the Dark Eagle hypersonic system, and fired new PRSM missiles. Those have a range up to 500 kilometers using HIMARS.
And Moscow sees HIMARS itself as a potential INF launcher.
They do. HIMARS in its tracked version, the M270 MLRS, they view them as ground launchers capable of firing INF missiles.
Anything else driving this decision?
They also mentioned a July 2024 deal between the U.S. and Germany for episodic deployment of long-range weapons in Germany starting 2026, possibly becoming permanent later, and noted that some U.S. allies want to get or build these missiles themselves. So Russia's conclusion is that all this adds up to a destabilizing missile buildup near their borders.
Posing a direct strategic threat, in their view.
Exactly. And necessitating what they call compensating military technical measures. Basically, they feel they have to respond in kind.
What are Russian experts predicting will happen now?
Well, the expectation is this withdrawal will likely lead to escalation in Europe. Some are drawing parallels to the missile crisis back in the late 70s.
And is this linked to U.S. President Trump's ultimatum?
Some observers definitely see it that way. As a response, perhaps. A signal that Russia is willing to ditch its previous self-restraint if pushed.
Where might Russia deploy these missiles now?
The thinking is likely deployment of systems like the Oreshnik complex and that 9M729 cruise missile within European Russia.
Areas like...
Regions like Leningrad, Pskov, Smolensk are mentioned. Potentially Belarus, too.
Not just Kaliningrad.
Kaliningrad's often mentioned, but experts point out it's quite vulnerable. So other Western regions and possibly Belarus might see more significant deployments.
How are arms control advocates viewing this?
A director at a U.S. Arms Control Association described it as really a symptom of a much bigger problem.
Which is?
The complete lack of meaningful dialogue on any of these systems, strategic, intermediate, shorter range. There are no new INF agreements, not even talks about limits after the New START treaty expires soon.
So a breakdown in arms control dialogue coinciding with rising tensions, economic pressure, and now this missile moratorium withdrawal. A volatile mix.
A very volatile mix, indeed. It feels like we're entering a much less predictable phase.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.